Jacksonville, Texas has long been celebrated for the farming and distribution of tomatoes. But there was another industry that was spurred by the tomatoes and other crops there: baskets. That's right, you have to have a way to transport all those crops, and that was the role of the recently abandoned Texas Basket Factory.
Texas is full of lost history, from lost cemeteries to abandoned buildings, from the infamous to the obscure. Hitch a ride and travel across the Lone Star State, looking for hints of Texas' colorful past, our lost history. This is Expedition Texas, and we're gonna find it.
Communities across Texas have cash crops that have become part of their identity. From cotton in Elgin to bluebonnets in Ennis, from the oil in Kilgore to the roses in Tyler. Those items are often celebrated by the cities they helped grow, and Jacksonville is no different. The story of how tomatoes came to prominence in Jacksonville is the stuff of legend.
The International Railroad is coming from Houston, going all the way to Canada, is the plan. And it gets to Palestine, and they sign a big contract over there. They acquire the Great Northern Railroad, and they start coming this way. When they get to Jacksonville, the ground was so hard, full of iron scrap, they couldn't lay the tracks there. So they move on and bypass Jacksonville. So Jackson Smith and E.B. Ragsdale and M.L. Earl and others negotiate to have the town set here, and Sarah Fry donates the land for it. And so November 5th, 1872, the first steam engine rolls into Jacksonville. Changed everybody's lives. They were the cotton farmers, and it would take them 2 weeks to get their cotton to Shreveport or down to Houston. So now they could just go down and put it on the railroad and ship it out. And other towns begin to disappear because of it. Larissa disappears, and other towns disappear because of it. But that's how we got to be here. Okay, and then in 1896, C.J. Jarrett builds a raised bed, covers it with glass and pine straw. Walks over it with a thing called pegboard, and creates holes for his tomato seeds, and he keeps it warm and starts growing tomatoes. So by March, he's got full-size tomato plants, which he puts out in the field, and he's then pulling pink tomatoes before anybody else. And his brother was a marketing genius. He wraps them in paper, puts them in the boxes made by Mr. Aber of the Aber Box and Basket Factory, which is the precursor to the Texas Basket Factory, and ships them to New York. They arrive 2 weeks later. They are ripe, they are undamaged, and they're a huge hit. They taste wonderful. And the next year, the chefs come from New York and St. Louis and Chicago into Jacksonville to buy these amazing new tomatoes that were hitting the market. And that kicked us off.
Those famous Jacksonville tomatoes began to ship all over the country thanks to the railroad. To ship the tomatoes to market and keep them in good shape for the trip, basket factories began to spring up. One of the largest, Texas Basket Factory, grew and survived long beyond the boom of tomatoes in Jacksonville. Today, Jacksonville continues to celebrate the tomatoes with their annual Tomato Fest. And up until a few years ago, folks could visit the factory where the baskets were made. Today, we're headed to Jacksonville to explore the remnants of the Texas Basket Factory.
Basket business in Jacksonville, Texas started in 1896. It was started by my grandfather.
You're watching Expedition Texas.
Jacksonville, Texas, getting ready to tour the Texas Basket Factory. Our guide, David Haberly, was a longtime employee and sometimes inventor who helped create automation that once turned out so many baskets in Jacksonville.
The basket business in Jacksonville, Texas started in 1896 at a firm called Aber Box and Basket Factory. The reason it was brought to Jacksonville, Texas is to move a way to properly move fruit and vegetables from the Jacksonville area, which we had a large farm population. We had the right weather, we had the right soil, and to move it to market, either in boxcars. Well, for a long time in boxcars, basket was a container with a lid on it. We manufactured the lids to hold it together. It could be shipped in boxcar loads. The boxcars were down at stations downtown. Jacksonville was put together really by the railroad. And then the produce would be packaged in them, and along the packing sheds were railroad cars. And they packed in the railroad cars, in some cases iced down, for their trip, principally like to Dallas or Houston or other markets. Initially, they were close by.
Now we're headed into Jacksonville's Texas Basket Factory. Hi, David. How's it going, man?
Fine, thank you.
It's good to see you. Now, we're out here at what is really a part of Jacksonville's history. We all know Jacksonville famous for tomatoes, Jacksonville even famous for peaches, probably a lesser known thing. But that produce had to get to the market somehow, and that's where this factory came in, the Texas Basket Factory. And I understand this goes way back in your family, and this piece of equipment right here behind you actually has a little bit to do with that.
Yes, the equipment does. Actually, the ground doesn't. There were 3 basket factories in Jacksonville. The first one, where my grandfather started in a different place in town in 1896.
Wow.
At that time, it was peaches. In the late 20s, early 30s, a blight came in and killed most of the peach trees. And it was a big business here in town, not only for the farmers, the brokers, the railroad company. And so the men in town, mostly the buyers and sellers, got together and brought a scientist in from A&M, and he studied the labor market, the soil, the weather, and came up with the idea that maybe if we planted tomatoes, we could use that to replace the peaches. And it did in a much bigger way. And so this factory manufactured baskets for peaches, and very little change in the basket to manufacture tomato baskets.
Okay.
In bushel and half bushel.
So this piece of equipment that's behind you here, talk to me about this. I mean, I can tell how it can be used to press a basket.
This piece of equipment was built for and ran its entire life off steam.
Wow. It
had conveyor belts, in this case one belt, that ran to the ceiling, and there were line shafts going down through the factory that had, the line shaft itself was powered by steam, had a big steam engine in it with a flywheel around 14 foot in diameter, and it drove a line shaft running down through the mill, and machines were sitting off either side of it perpendicular to the shaft with belts coming down running those.
Wow. And this is a piece of history here.
Yeah, real old history. That dates to the late teens through the 20s and into the 30s. A different generation was taken over back around that time, and naturally with it, different ideas and using the money differently to update the equipment. Next big update came during and after World War II.
And another example of that right here is you got some nuts and bolts and wires kind of in here in one of the baskets, which is kind of covered in oil, which I am now too. We're in Jacksonville, Texas, the tomato capital of Texas that once distributed crops all over the country, utilizing baskets made right at home. Our guide today is longtime employee David Haberly. So to start off with, I mean, you use sweet gum trees, which I know we have plenty of those in East Texas, and
yes.
I guess this is where all of it came in, right?
Right. We stored it behind us here in the log yard, underwater.
Underwater?
Yeah, we wanted the very best grade of wood. Once we wanted the log, I made out a list every morning of what they were supposed to cut that day. The logs were brought up on the conveyor on the other side of this building right here, the little building. They were brought up, they were debarked, brought to the end of that conveyor, kicked off, came back this way.
Okay.
And the guy running the debarker had a list of what all he was supposed to cut, what length they were. And he cut them up with that big heavy saw there.
Yeah, I see that.
Kicked them off, they ran down in this floor plate here.
Okay.
Picked them up with the crane behind us.
Yeah.
And put them in racks according to their size and species. We produced wood so thin you could see light through it for our eighth pick, all the way up to well around a 1/16 of an inch for a bushel basket. The bands going around a bushel or on the inside of the basket, top hand band was 1/8 of an inch thick. And we use 1/16 strips doubled up, top, middle, and bottom head to staple them there to give the basket a little more elasticity.
You have all of this. What is this large contraption here?
Wood-fired boilers. There are not too many left in Texas that fire on wood. The big boilers at Temple East Tex and other mills like that, but they're all automatic. This boiler was fired by hand, and we're looking at the back of the boilers, which on Saturday had to be cleaned out. You drug the ashes and you clean the flues. And that's what we had to do on this every week. Okay, this is a Cove 242 veneer lathe built in 1954 by Co-Manufacturing. It was brought to Jacksonville by Aber Box and Basket Factory in 1964.
Okay, can we go up and see it?
Yes, come on up. Just watch your step.
Now, I know this place was in operation up until pretty recently, and throughout the property, you see lots of examples of this factory's work being used throughout the factory. And another example of that right here is you got some nuts and bolts and wires kind of in here in one of the baskets, which is kind of covered in oil, which I am now too.
That's a half pick.
Okay, and then all the controls, and what is this? Is this like a maintenance log, or what did we have here? Still on here.
That gives you all the variants under different sizes of everything we cut.
How to set up the machine then?
Yes.
Okay, all the controls here. All right, and what am I looking at here?
All right. This is an 80-inch Cove 242. Here's your veneer knife here.
Wow.
It's 80 inches long.
Uh-huh.
Your pressure bar is right here.
Okay.
And the lathe can be set up to run numerous, just almost infinitesimal thicknesses.
This piece here is also built by family, right?
Yes. It was built the same year and for the veneer lathe when it was bought in 1954. And it will advance the wood the right amount, clip it, and on the other side I put a little conveyor that will pull it away from the knife, where the operator doesn't have to be anywhere near the knife. And that was a new thing, by the way, and totally safe to operate. And it gives you good, clean cut. It's a precise width that you wanted it.
This table looks like it's got a little bit of mileage on it too. When was this built?
This table was built in 1954.
Wow. One look at the beautiful landscape in and around Mount Vernon, Texas, and a quick drive through downtown is enough to make you want to stay a while. That's the reason Mount Vernon is this week's Expedition Texas Spotlight City.
Mount Vernon as a community began getting established in the 1830s, 1840s. This was a really good resource for fresh, clean water. There were lots of springs and wells around here, and there is the Cherokee Trace and the Comanche Trail, and they intersect very close to here. So Anglo travelers would come through this area, and a lot of them decided to stay just because the resources were so plentiful.
As the county seat of Franklin County, Mount Vernon's downtown centers around their beautiful courthouse. Completed in 1912, it replaced the original courthouse in what is now the downtown plaza. Mount Vernon was later home to some folks who became pretty well known.
Of course, Don Meredith is from Mount Vernon, Texas. Dandy Don, he was a Dallas Cowboys quarterback. We maintain a museum downtown, the Fire Station Museum, with a huge exhibit dedicated to Dandy Don. Definitely our hometown hero.
And Mount Vernon was also home to a literal giant of the Civil War.
Colonel Thruston, the tallest man from the Civil War, was from Franklin County, and we maintain his homestead here.
Mount Vernon's history lives on in museums and along its streets. Here's City Administrator Craig Lindholm.
The attraction to Mount Vernon is that it's a great balance of the historic charm with a belief that we're a progressive city, that we want to attract young people, that we want to become a place for families, you know, to get away from the large cities but still have the amenities, some of the amenities that you have in large cities, to have a quality of life. And that's what Mount Vernon is to me.
A city with stories to tell that's not afraid to write new ones. That's why Mount Vernon is this week's Spotlight City. We're touring the Texas Basket Factory in Jacksonville, Texas. The factory's been closed for a few years now, but so much remains. Former employee David Haberly is taking us through the process of turning sweet gum wood into beautiful Jacksonville baskets. All right, we're going to start off making baskets, but you said we're coming up on the lids here first, right?
Right. Where we fasten together the mat, which is the body of the lid. It's made up of several, 4, 6, 7, 8 different slats of veneer. Veneer cut on the lathes, one of the lathes that we saw.
These are those thin pieces that he was talking about a little bit earlier. Put together, I guess, with...
These are shy of 1/8.
And we have a lot of wire down in here.
Yeah, it's 19 gauge staple wire is what they're put together with.
Okay.
And this will be sewn to a hook, clipped and rounded. And this will be the lid for a basket to hold in the fruit and vegetable. Sometimes we would put a crown in it if the customer wanted.
And so we've seen how to assemble the lids here. Now we're going to start putting together some baskets, right?
Yes. This is a bushel basket.
Okay.
You have to make the stays first, and there's a pattern you would lay down on this web table, and you'd lay out the stays in a specific order on the pattern that would be in a circle, and it looked like we call them webs.
This table looks like it's got a little bit of mileage on it too. When was this built?
This table was built in 1954.
Wow.
When they rebuilt, my dad and my uncle rebuilt their mill at David Box.
These patterns back here hanging on the wall, does this have anything to do with this portion of it?
Yes, they all do.
What were these? These
are the pans that set on the web tables, and each row of these is a different size basket. The wire is 12.5 gauge wire. It comes in on a coil. The wire comes off the coil and goes up. It goes over a pulley, and every time the wire goes somewhere, you got to control it. So it goes through a carbide eye, which means it won't wear out. The hole won't. And runs down a tube and around another corner, and these two bends get it started straightening the wire out.
That's a big deal, and you're actually really proud of this. Tell us why.
Well, I thought it out.
You created this system here.
Yes, I had a mentor in Arkansas named Henry Swan. He was a real special guy to me. Coming up on the dry end of a basket dryer.
Okay.
The baskets would roll off. We'd come off the edge of it. We would fill up the truck. They would take the truck across the street to the warehouses and inventory them in the warehouse, then come back for another one.
You talked about this and you kind of mentioned it off camera a couple of times. You went to college, you got your degree, and you ended up making baskets the rest of your life and said you wouldn't have it any other way.
The fun part of doing all this was not only the people, which I had real good people back then, but it was the thinking part of what can I do next to help out and do things. And draw it on graph paper, draw it out and make it work on paper first, and then I'd put it in the machine shop here, and then we would build it.
Yeah, there were a lot of things that you've shown us throughout our trip through here. There were things where you had a problem and you would sit down and come up with a solution and then build it and make it happen. And some of those machines still sit around here. This is your work, your life's work here.
It's life's work, and I loved it. And let me say too, it wasn't a me deal, it was a we deal. I had some awful good people here, and we would kind of get together. I couldn't have done all this by myself.
The history of Jacksonville, Texas has been and will always be tied to the tasty and delicious Jacksonville tomatoes. While production has slowed and some of these support industries like the basket factory have left Jacksonville, the memories made will live on. Make a plan to visit the Tomato Fest each June to celebrate along with the folks in Jacksonville. Down the road, there's another lost legend waiting to be explored, and on Expedition Texas, we're going to find it.